When I was 16, I was looking for a new gaming PC to buy on Craigslist. I had just gotten my first job and wanted to treat myself after my first paycheck. I was online pretty much every day after work, scrolling through new listings until one of them looked good. It was a 3-year-old Alienware with decent specs listed for only $200. The description said they had recently upgraded to a newer PC and had no use for this one, but that it still worked fine. I sent an email, and the seller quickly responded. We exchanged a few messages and agreed to meet the next day. He told me to meet him at a specific grocery store parking lot at 8 p.m. It was far, so I suggested meeting halfway, but he made excuses, saying he was busy all week and couldn't drive far. If I wanted the PC, I'd have to pick it up near him. Although it was a little annoying, I thought the deal was worth it and agreed to pick it up in the morning. I almost called it off, but then he sent me videos showing the PC working and assured me that he would refund me if there were any issues, which made me feel better about it. I drove 35 minutes to the grocery store he specified. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a truck in the far back. It was the only car in the lot, and the grocery store's lights were off, indicating it was closed. This defeated the purpose of meeting at a safe, public place, but having driven almost 40 minutes, I hoped it would go smoothly. I parked by his truck and got out. The man inside leaned over, looked down from his window without smiling or greeting me, just inspecting me, which was uncomfortable. Then he got out. He was an older guy, late 40s or 50s, with thinning brown hair. From a quick look, something seemed wrong. I stood a few feet away, trying to keep my distance as he opened the back door. Inside, I saw the computer on the seat further inside the truck. He pointed and said I could take it out and look at it, with his hand still on the door, waiting for me to crawl in and grab it. I noticed a small detail: the handle on the inside of the door he was holding open was missing. It was obvious what this was. I started backing away and hurried into my car. He yelled for me to come back, but I pulled out right away. The guy rushed into his truck and drove off in the other direction. There was no doubt that if I'd crawled into his back seat, he would have slammed the door behind me, trapping me inside. Unfortunately, all I had was his email to send to the police, but there was no tracing it. I hope nobody else falls for his disturbing Craigslist scam. I've checked a few times since then to see if his ad was back up, hoping to set him up with the police. So far I haven't seen anything, but he could be using a different alias and trying to scam with a different item. My advice is to stay away from Craigslist. I was using Craigslist to find a condo or room in a house to live in for a few months. Most normal apartments only have 1-year leasing terms, but Craigslist was full of private owners renting out their places or rooms. Usually they were cheaper, and the owners were more willing to negotiate on the length of the lease. I had about a month to search and found and viewed a few places, but they all backed out last minute. Then I found another one that looked like the others. It was a room for rent in a home 20 minutes from me. The person listing it was a 22-year-old guy. After reaching out, we texted back and forth for a few days before booking a time for me to view the room. When I drove out and got to the street, I felt less excited. The houses looked barely standing or not taken care of, with overgrown yards and junk in their front lawns. I hoped the one I was viewing would be better. When I parked in the driveway, it looked like all the rest. Still, I figured I'd give it a shot since I was already there. I got out and pressed the doorbell, but it didn't work, so I knocked. Immediately, heavy footsteps approached from the other side of the door. There was an uncomfortable pause, like 15 seconds. Then he opened it just a crack. I could only see half his face as he asked my name. I nervously smiled and answered. Then he opened the door all the way and welcomed me inside. He was tall and somewhat thin with shoulder-length hair and tattoos on his neck. It was obvious he wasn't in his 20s, at least mid-30s, maybe older. I was already inside the house, and he led me through the hallway quickly, talking nonstop, making it hard for me to think or realize how odd the situation was. The kitchen was old and beat up, with partially open cabinets loosely hanging on their hinges. He spent a few seconds there before moving into the next hallway with 2 doors. He opened the first door, saying this would be my room. I finally had a moment to catch my breath and think. I figured it was best to continue with the tour since I was already inside and never come back. But as I stood there, hesitating for maybe 3 or 4 seconds, the man suddenly got angry. His face and demeanor changed instantly. He didn't say another word but started walking toward me. I quickly backed away, and he matched my pace, moving quicker. I turned and sprinted down the hallway. As I left the house, I heard him stop at the front door and slam it shut behind me. I felt stupid for even entering the home after realizing things didn't add up. Technically, nothing happened, but everything pointed to an awful outcome. After that, I was too terrified to try Craigslist again. I live on the East Coast, where there are a lot of homesteads and off-grid cabins and houses. Some aren't fully off-grid but are far out on large properties with 40-plus acres. It's normal here to buy used tools and equipment from neighbors or others in the area. At the time, I was doing construction on my property and needed a flatbed trailer for my truck to haul more materials from hardware stores. These are absurdly expensive, but since almost everyone here has them, there are many used ones for sale. Craigslist was the first and only site I checked. There were a bunch for sale, and I sent out multiple emails. Only one replied, and we scheduled a time for me to stop by. All I knew was that his name was Devon, and he had what I needed. This was common around here, and I had no worries. I drove about an hour from my place through mostly national forest roads until I made it to his driveway. It was a thin gravel road into the woods. I drove up to his house, a very small and old wooden cabin with a clearing in the trees leading up to it. The first thing I noticed was there was no flatbed trailer on the property. It's a huge thing, it couldn't just be hiding behind a tree. I expected to see it right when I pulled in. The only thing I could think of was that there must be a garage or shed in the back. I parked in the grass and got out. I stood for a few seconds to see if he'd come out, but he didn't. I walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. While waiting, I couldn't tell if any lights were on inside. The curtains covered the windows and the sun was setting, making it hard to tell. After waiting a minute, nobody came to the door, and I started to feel like nobody was home. Then I got a text from Devon, saying to come around to the back of the cabin where he had the trailer. I felt something off but assumed it might be kept in the backyard, so I walked around to look. When I looked around the corner, all I saw were trees. I walked a bit further, stopping on the side of the cabin before reaching the back. There wasn't even a clearing behind the cabin, just woods as far as I could see. I'd had enough. I started walking back to my truck but suddenly heard something behind me. I turned and looked at the woods again, not seeing anything. What I heard sounded like someone approaching from just around the corner. I continued walking, quickening my pace before hearing loud footsteps pushing through the grass behind me. I only caught a glimpse of the guy charging at me before I booked it for my truck. I don't know if he gave up right away or had something else in mind, but when I got in and looked back at the cabin, he was gone. I drove to the nearest town and contacted the police. The state didn't even know about any cabin built on that land. It was supposed to be unoccupied. When they investigated, it was clearly abandoned, with no intent to sell me anything. The guy was definitely setting me up for something harmful. My guess is that he was hiding along the back wall of the cabin, waiting to jump me as soon as I came around. Luckily, I knew something was up and didn't walk all the way back there. If I had, who knows where I'd be right now. When I put my dining room set up for sale on Craigslist, I never expected it would lead to a life-threatening encounter with a man hiding in my pantry, armed and ready to strike. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist for $1,200 and included slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers, likely because I lived in a rural area. Eventually, I received a call from a man who sounded a bit off but wanted to check out the set. I gave him my address, and he said he'd be over within the hour. I dusted the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes, surprising me because he must have lived nearby, which was unusual in my area. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He wore a stained undershirt, baggy pants with tears, and had a gray mustache stained brown in the middle. His hair was a complete mess. Despite my discomfort, I invited him in. He immediately focused on the dining room set, walking around slowly, making weird sounds, and touching every inch of the furniture. To break the silence, I reminded him that the asking price was $1,200. He stopped, looked at me with an unnerving smile, and offered $500. I laughed at the insane offer, thinking he was joking, but his smile turned angry. I apologized and said $1,000 was the lowest I could go. He started acting even stranger, putting his hands to his head, making strange noises and pacing. He then looked at me with anger and hatred. Realizing this man wasn't right in the head, I needed him out of my house. I thanked him for coming, hinting it was time for him to leave, but he didn't move. His stare was full of malice. Fearing for my safety, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed my .45, and hid behind the wall, peeking into the dining room. The man was gone. I locked my bedroom door and called the police. While hiding, I heard sirens. I stayed put until the police arrived. I came out with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They asked me to wait outside while they searched the house. After about 5 minutes, the police emerged with the man in handcuffs. They told me he was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. It felt like a miracle that the police weren't shot. What still haunts me is the look of malice and hatred he gave me from the police car as it drove off. I can't shake the fear that he'll come back for me once he gets out of jail. I'm seriously considering moving to escape the constant paranoia. Selling a dining room set on Craigslist seemed harmless until I found myself face to face with a dangerous man who left me fearing for my life and questioning my safety at home. I was selling a dining room set on Craigslist for $1,200 and included slightly negotiable in the title. It was a good-looking set, but I wasn't getting any offers, likely because I lived in a rural area. Eventually, I received a call from a man who sounded a bit off but wanted to check out the set. I gave him my address, and he said he'd be over within the hour. I dusted the furniture one more time to make it look as nice as possible. The doorbell rang within 10 minutes, surprising me because he must have lived nearby, which was unusual in my area. I opened the door and immediately felt uncomfortable about letting this man into my house. He wore a stained undershirt, baggy pants with tears, and had a gray mustache stained brown in the middle. His hair was a complete mess. Despite my discomfort, I invited him in. He immediately focused on the dining room set, walking around slowly, making weird sounds, and touching every inch of the furniture. To break the silence, I reminded him that the asking price was $1,200. He stopped, looked at me with an unnerving smile, and offered $500. I laughed at the insane offer, thinking he was joking, but his smile turned angry. I apologized and said $1,000 was the lowest I could go. He started acting even stranger, putting his hands to his head, making strange noises and pacing. He then looked at me with anger and hatred. Realizing this man wasn't right in the head, I needed him out of my house. I thanked him for coming, hinting it was time for him to leave, but he didn't move. His stare was full of malice. Fearing for my safety, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, grabbed my .45, and hid behind the wall, peeking into the dining room. The man was gone. I locked my bedroom door and called the police. While hiding, I heard sirens. I stayed put until the police arrived. I came out with my hands raised and showed them my ID. They asked me to wait outside while they searched the house. After about 5 minutes, the police emerged with the man in handcuffs. They told me he was hiding in my pantry closet with a loaded gun. It felt like a miracle that the police weren't shot. What still haunts me is the look of malice and hatred he gave me from the police car as it drove off. I can't shake the fear that he'll come back for me once he gets out of jail. I'm seriously considering moving to escape the constant paranoia. Imagine searching for your first apartment on Craigslist and finding yourself in an abandoned house with a menacing stranger leading you to a basement filled with horrors. This happened to Amanda. This is a popular story with my family and most of my friends. Amanda, my brother's girlfriend, was looking for her first apartment and decided to find a roommate online. She found an ad on Craigslist titled "Roommate Wanted Females Only." The listing was for a room in a house for $225 a month, which was cheap for the area. The occupant described herself as a 23-year-old college student uncomfortable living with males. Amanda liked the place, but there was only one photo of the house's exterior. She emailed the occupant and quickly got a reply with details and a time to visit. When Amanda arrived, there was a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door. The house looked nice but slightly unkempt." She knocked on the back door, and an older man answered, claiming to be the landlord. He said the occupant was out and had asked him to show her around. Amanda felt uneasy as the man, who appeared to be in his 40s and unkempt, showed her the house. Only the kitchen light was on, and there was no furniture. The landlord was irritable, rushing her through the rooms and only letting her look briefly. He refused to open one room, saying it was the occupant's and he didn't want to invade her privacy. Amanda noticed the front door had a plank nailed across it. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Amanda thanked the man and tried to leave. He then insisted on showing her the basement, claiming it was recently furnished. They were in a small hallway near the basement door, which opened outward, creating a barrier. The basement was pitch black, and he motioned for her to go down first. At that moment, Amanda received a text. Thinking quickly, she pretended it was a call from someone outside the house. She excused herself and walked out the back door, sprinting to her car and speeding away. At home, she told her family everything, and they called the police. The Craigslist post had been removed, and the house had been abandoned for over 6 months. In the room the landlord didn't open, police found a pile of dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty jugs. The walls were covered with ripped-up pages from porn magazines. In the basement, they found a thin piece of fishing twine at shin level across the stairs, a broom handle wrapped in leather belts, and a small box with rolls of assorted teeth. "Okay, I've got a story for you," I began, excitement lacing my voice. "I'll never forget the time I went on Craigslist to find a vintage rocking chair. I've always been into antique furniture, and when I saw this amazing mahogany chair with these insane carvings, I just knew I had to have it. So I messaged the seller, and we agreed to meet up at their place the next day. I was pretty pumped about it," I continued, recalling the eagerness I felt. Anyway, the next day I grabbed the cash and drove to the seller's house. The address led me to this sketchy-looking neighborhood, which was a bit unsettling, but I told myself not to judge a book by its cover. When I arrived, the house was old and looked like it hadn't been taken care of in years. I started having second thoughts, but my desire for that rocking chair pushed me to go on, I explained, a sense of unease creeping in. So I walked up to the front door and knocked. The door slowly creaked open, and there was this shadowy figure just standing there, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated for a sec, but then went inside, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. I recounted, the memory sending shivers down my spine. The inside of the house was even creepier. It was dark and smelled like mildew, and there were all these old, dusty pieces of furniture and cobwebs everywhere. The seller led me through this labyrinth of rooms, and the further we went, the more I started to freak out. But I just kept telling myself that it was all in my head. I continued, my heart racing with each step. We finally got to this room in the back of the house, and there it was, the rocking chair I'd seen in the ad. It looked just as amazing as it did in the photos, and for a moment, I felt relieved. I went up to inspect the chair, excited to take it home. I handed the seller the cash, and they said they'd help me carry it to my car, I said, recalling the tense atmosphere. As we were heading back to the house, I noticed that a door we passed earlier that had been locked was now slightly open. I could hear these faint, desperate cries coming from inside, and I felt chills running down my spine. I glanced at the seller, who seemed to be getting more and more nervous, and my heart started pounding like crazy, I confessed, the memory still vivid in my mind. I knew I had to get out of there, so I pretended that I got an emergency phone call and told the seller I had to leave right away, but to come back for the chair later. The seller hesitated, then finally agreed. I practically sprinted out of the house, my heart pounding so hard I could hardly breathe, I recalled, the panic still fresh. Once I was safe in my car, I sped off to the nearest police station. I told them everything that had happened, my hands shaking the whole time. The police acted quickly and launched an investigation. It turned out that the seller had kidnapped someone and was holding them captive in that room, I revealed, the shock still evident in my voice. I couldn't believe how close I'd come to a truly terrifying situation. The police were able to save the person being held captive, and the seller was arrested. They had a long criminal record, including theft and assault. I can't even imagine what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts and gotten out of there when I did, I admitted, a shiver running down my spine at the thought. My friends and family were shocked when they heard my story. They couldn't believe something like this could happen to someone they knew. I became a lot more cautious after that, always making sure to trust my gut and put safety first. As for the rocking chair, well, I never went back for it, I concluded, the memory still haunting me. The thought of going back to that house, even with the police involved, was too much for me to handle. Eventually, I found another antique chair from a reliable seller. But the memory of that night still lingers with me. Now, whenever I browse Craigslist or other online marketplaces, that eerie encounter is always at the back of my mind. I still can't help but shudder to think about the children's cries behind that door and the dark, musty house, I admitted, the horror of the situation still raw. As for the rocking chair, it has become a symbol of that fateful night. Even now, sometimes in the dead of night, I can't help but wonder what other sinister secrets that house and its twisted occupant might have been hiding. Roughly 2 years ago, I decided to sell my old phone on Craigslist after upgrading to a new one. The phone was only 2 years old and in good condition, so I thought it would attract buyers. After considering eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and Craigslist, I opted for the latter, prioritizing a quick sale over making a profit. Listing the phone at a reasonable price, I received a text message expressing interest within a few hours. The potential buyer, Molly, seemed eager, so we arranged to meet the following day outside a local strip mall, conveniently located for both of us. When we met, the transaction went smoothly, and Molly purchased the phone without any issues. Everything appeared normal during our brief interaction, and there were no red flags. However, things took a strange turn in the days that followed. Molly began texting me, initially asking me to come over and then inquiring if she could visit my place. It was unexpected and out of context, considering our interaction had been solely about the phone sale. At first I wondered if she had the wrong number, but then she mentioned my name, indicating she was indeed contacting me intentionally. I had no interest in pursuing any further interaction with Molly beyond the sale, and her persistent texts, which continued late into the night and into the next morning, left me feeling uncomfortable and confused. Once again, Molly persisted in her attempts to come over, ignoring my previous attempts to deter her. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I lied and told her I had a girlfriend, hoping she would take the hint and leave me alone. However, Molly disregarded my statement, insisting it didn't matter, and continued texting me as if we were close friends, asking about my activities. Feeling bewildered by her behavior, I asked her to stop, but she became angry and started hurling insults at me. Frustrated and alarmed, I decided to block her, hoping to put an end to the unsettling situation. Little did I know, the ordeal was far from over. Later that same night, I heard a knock at my front door. Peering through the window, I was stunned to see Molly standing outside. How did she find out where I lived? It was alarming to think she might have followed me home. Reluctantly, I answered the door, intending to firmly tell her to leave. However, as soon as I opened the door, Molly launched into a tirade of curses and refused to leave. Growing increasingly aggressive, she attempted to enter my house. In a panic, I slammed the door shut and locked it, but she persisted, banging on windows and trying to force her way inside. Realizing I needed help, I called the police and waited inside. Molly continued her relentless assault on my home, banging on windows and attempting to open doors. Even when I tried to reason with her through a window, she remained undeterred. Thankfully, the police arrived and were able to intervene, putting an end to Molly's alarming behavior. Subsequently, I obtained a restraining order against her, as I couldn't comprehend why she fixated on me so intensely. I suspected drugs might be involved, but I couldn't say for sure. This experience served as a stark reminder to exercise caution when using platforms like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. I have a Craigslist horror story that I'd like to share, serving as a cautionary tale for those using such websites. A few years ago, I was selling my old MacBook Pro laptop. It was still fairly new, and since I had received a new one from work, I decided to put it up for sale on Craigslist for $1,000. It was a reasonable price considering its condition and value. Within 24 hours of posting the ad, I received a text from someone expressing interest in buying the laptop. I confirmed the price of $1,000 and suggested meeting in a public place for safety reasons. The person proposed Walmart, which seemed like a reasonable choice due to its high visibility and foot traffic. However, what raised a red flag was the person's insistence on meeting at 10 p.m. or later, claiming they worked overnight shifts. Despite my reservations, I agreed to the meeting time. When I asked for their name, they identified themselves as Derek, providing only a vague description of being of average height with dark hair. Despite the uncertainty, we settled on meeting at 10:15 p.m. the following night at Walmart. Arriving shortly after 10 p.m., I parked in the middle of the parking lot, which by then was eerily quiet as the store was set to close at 11 p.m. I believe I texted Derek to let him know that I was at the agreed meeting spot. However, he didn't respond for a while, leaving me waiting and growing increasingly frustrated. It wasn't until around 10:30 p.m. that he finally replied, informing me that he would arrive in about 15 minutes. Despite my annoyance, I decided to wait patiently, hoping that selling the laptop would make it worth the wait. As time ticked by and it approached 11 p.m., I was on the verge of leaving when Derek finally texted me, claiming he had arrived and was at the back of the parking lot. Scanning the area, I couldn't spot him from where I was parked, eager to conclude the transaction. I drove towards the rear of the parking lot, where several cars were scattered randomly. Unsure which one belonged to Derek, I parked in a random spot and asked him again for his location. With no immediate response from Derek, I suddenly spotted a car approaching. Assuming it was him, I watched as it drew nearer, only to realize that the driver and passengers were all wearing black ski masks. Sensing danger, I swiftly drove away, prompting the car to follow me briefly. However, as we reached the front of the parking lot, I noticed a police car stationed there. Seizing the opportunity, I drove towards the police car, prompting the car behind me to make a hasty U-turn in the narrow parking island. Thankfully, the ploy worked, and the suspicious individuals disappeared. Relieved, I drove home and promptly blocked Derek's number. Subsequently, I removed my laptop from Craigslist and opted to list it on eBay instead. At 23, I was on the hunt for a studio apartment to rent. Fresh out of college, I had next to no money, barely scraping by on a bit more than minimum wage. My primary focus was finding the cheapest possible option available. Initially, I searched for both one-bedroom apartments and studios. However, as the weeks went by, it became increasingly clear that those options were simply not financially feasible. Reluctantly, I turned to Craigslist, despite its less than stellar reputation. One of my friends had a positive experience and recommended it, so I decided to give it a shot. On the first day of browsing Craigslist, I didn't come across anything suitable, though the sheer volume of listings gave me a glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, none of them matched my location or price requirements. It was around the third or fourth day of searching that I stumbled upon a new listing that caught my attention. Located a few miles away, it was for a studio in a small apartment building. Despite the low-quality, pixelated pictures, I decided to investigate further, intrigued by the promising details. I reached out to the owner, who responded promptly, and we arranged a tour for later that evening at 7. In our brief exchange, nothing struck me as out of the ordinary about the owner. His messages were professional, and he appeared eager to show me the place. A couple of hours later, I got into my car and started driving over to the address he sent me. It's worth noting that I was aware beforehand that this wasn't a particularly nice area of our city, but it was the most affordable. Honestly, I didn't think it was too bad, although looking back, perhaps I was just being naive because it seemed like my only option. Upon arriving, I pulled up to a rather old-looking apartment building. Parking on the side of the street, I texted the man to let him know I had arrived, then proceeded to walk up to the front door. Not spotting the man anywhere, I buzzed the room and waited for a few seconds before the door unlocked. Stepping inside, I was greeted by a staircase in the middle and 2 rooms on either side. Before I could even glance at the room numbers, a voice echoed from somewhere above the staircase, informing me that they were on the 3rd floor. Assuming the man was addressing me, I began ascending the stairs. However, I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease at his absence from the door, especially considering how professional he had been in our text exchanges. Upon reaching the top of the steps, I found myself in a small hallway with 2 doors, one of which was open. I walked over and peered inside, only to find a man standing a few feet away, looking back at me. He greeted me warmly, shook my hand, and invited me inside. Yet my confusion was immediate. The place was clearly inhabited, with a couch, TV, chairs, and even food on the counters. It was unmistakably lived in. "Does someone else live here?" I asked kindly. The man quickly replied with a short laugh and said, "No one lived here and everything would be gone by tomorrow." I smiled and said, "Okay, though that response didn't sit right with me." He started leading me further in, pointing out features of the place. But it suddenly dawned on me that this wasn't even a studio. There were multiple doors, surely leading to other rooms. This was at least a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And there was no way the price could be what he said it was. It seemed like he noticed my suspicions as he stopped what he was saying and moved toward the hallway. He opened one of the doors that clearly led to a bedroom and started telling me to take a look inside. But before I could answer, we were interrupted when my phone chimed. I pulled it out of my pocket and checked who it was. My face went pale, seeing it was from the man from Craigslist asking where I was. I looked up in horror, realizing what had happened, and I could tell that whoever this guy was in front of me knew that I'd figured it out. This terrifying moment passed, and the guy didn't move or say anything. He just stood and looked at me with a blank stare. After a moment, I hurried out of there and down the stairs, not hearing the guy follow. I got in my car and left, feeling horrified. I never even texted the actual man back, as I was no longer interested in staying anywhere near that place. And I didn't know if maybe he was in on it too, somehow. But whoever that guy was who lured me into his home was so close to being able to probably abduct me. I don't know. And I don't even want to know. But I never opened Craigslist again after that night. I just finished my studies and needed a small place to live while I looked for a job. I was working part-time at a little grocery store. But now that I was done with school, it was time to find something better. Renting an apartment by myself was too expensive, so I was on the lookout for a room to rent in someone's house. I knew it would be a bit uncomfortable at first living with strangers, but I didn't really have another option. My friend from school who used to share a room with me told me to try Craigslist. It seemed that other websites didn't list single rooms or were too complicated to use. Craigslist had a lot of choices, so I decided to stick with it. After several days, I was getting nowhere. Nobody answered my messages, and the few who did just said the room was already taken. Then, on a Saturday morning, I saw a new listing. It was close, affordable, and looked decent. A man named John was offering a large house with an available bedroom which also had its own bathroom and closet. It seemed perfect. So I sent him an email to show my interest and then went off to my job. Since the ad was fresh that morning, I was hopeful I was the first to reach out. During my lunch break, I checked my emails and saw that John had replied. He wanted me to come and see the place that same afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I really wanted this room, so I agreed, and we set a time. After my shift, I drove there, taking only about 10 minutes. The house looked good from the outside, just a normal house in a regular neighborhood. I parked my car nearby and walked up to the door to knock softly. After waiting a little, I knocked again, a bit louder. Just as I was about to text John, he opened the door to let me in. He was covered in sweat, as though he'd just been exercising, and he didn't smell nice at all. I didn't want to seem rude, so I didn't mention it. He started showing me around the first floor, pointing out the kitchen and living room. He said he hardly used these rooms, so I wouldn't be in his way, but looking around, it seemed like he used them a lot. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dirty dishes, and the couch was stained all over. The house was a lot messier than I expected, especially since the photos made it look so clean. One thing that really stood out to me was the couch in the living room. The picture showed a brown leather couch, but the one I saw was black. I guess John might have used old photos of the house from before. This felt a bit dishonest, but I was mainly interested in my room, which was upstairs. John led me to the stairs and then stopped, gesturing for me to go up first. I felt really uneasy as I climbed the stairs, especially since John stayed at the bottom just smiling and telling me my room was the first one on the left. When I reached the top and was about to go to my room, I heard a soft noise from behind the door. I looked back at John, and his smile was gone. "Is there someone else living here?" I asked. He sounded annoyed and said it was just a friend staying over and I shouldn't worry. He told me to go look at the room, insisting I would like it. By then, I was scared. Why didn't you mention his friend earlier, I thought. It felt like something I should have known. I wanted to leave immediately. I tried to sound confident as I told John the place wasn't right for me and started back down the stairs. He didn't seem happy and blocked the bottom of the stairs. I stopped a few steps away, insisting I had to leave. He tried once more to get me to see the room, but I refused. After a moment, he surprisingly stepped aside with a smile, letting me pass. I rushed out the door. Something was off about that house. I felt fortunate to get out so easily. I'd feared I might need to push my way out. Later, I checked Craigslist, and the ad was gone. I often think about what was in that room. Maybe it was empty, but I feel it was something far worse. When I was in college, I used to go camping with friends during the summer. One year, we decided to explore a new area we hadn't visited before. It was a dense forest, quite far from the city. We were excited about the adventure and prepared all our gear, including tents, food, and a map of the area. After driving for several hours, we arrived and found a good spot to set up our camp. There were 5 of us: Mike, Sarah, Alex, John, and me. The first day went smoothly. We hiked a few trails, swam in a nearby lake, and enjoyed a campfire at night. However, things started getting strange on the second night. As we were sitting around the campfire, we heard rustling in the bushes. We assumed it was just a small animal and didn't pay much attention. But then, the noises got louder, and it felt like something or someone was watching us. Mike, being the bravest among us, grabbed a flashlight and walked towards the noise. We followed him, feeling a bit nervous. We didn't see anything unusual at first, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. Eventually, we shrugged it off and went back to the campfire. Later that night, as we were getting ready to sleep, Sarah screamed. We all rushed to her tent, where she pointed out that her backpack was missing. We searched the entire campsite but couldn't find it. We thought maybe an animal had dragged it away. We tried to sleep, but the feeling of unease kept us awake. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave a day early. We were all a bit spooked and didn't want to stay another night. As we were packing, we found Sarah's backpack hanging from a tree branch, about 20 feet off the ground. It was impossible for any of us to have put it there. We quickly packed the rest of our gear and left. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night in the forest. We never went back to that area again. When I was a kid, my family moved into an old house in a small town. It was a beautiful large house with a lot of character, but it was also quite old. My parents were excited about the house, and my siblings and I quickly found our favorite spots. The house had a big backyard, perfect for playing, and a cozy attic filled with all sorts of interesting old things. One evening, about a month after we moved in, I was in my room playing with my toys when I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was walking around up there. I called out to my parents, but they were downstairs and didn't hear me. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out myself. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky stairs to the attic. When I reached the top, I shone the flashlight around, but didn't see anything unusual. Just as I was about to go back down, I heard the noise again, this time closer. I turned around quickly and saw a shadow move across the wall. My heart started racing, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the noise continued. It sounded like soft footsteps coming towards me. I gathered all my courage and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly backed away towards the stairs, keeping the flashlight pointed ahead. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze pass by me, and the flashlight flickered. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could and didn't stop until I reached my parents. I told them what had happened, but they assured me it was probably just the old house settling or the wind. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the attic. After that night, I avoided the attic as much as possible. Whenever I had to go up there, I made sure it was during the day and that someone else was with me. Even now, years later, I still get a little uneasy thinking about that old house and the strange noises in the attic. One summer, my friends and I decided to take a road trip across the country. We planned to visit various landmarks and camp out at different spots along the way. We were excited about the adventure and spent weeks preparing for the trip. We packed all the essentials, made a detailed itinerary, and set off early one morning. Our journey was going well, and we had a lot of fun visiting different places. One night, we found a secluded camping spot near a forest. It was perfect quiet, beautiful, and far from any busy roads. We set up our tents, built a campfire, and enjoyed a relaxing evening under the stars. As it got late, we decided to get some sleep. We were exhausted from the day's activities and fell asleep quickly. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. I thought maybe one of my friends was talking in their sleep, so I tried to go back to sleep. But the whispering continued and seemed to be getting closer. I sat up and looked around the tent, but I couldn't see anything. I unzipped the tent slightly and peered outside. The campfire had died down and everything was dark. Suddenly, I heard the whispering right next to my ear. I jumped and looked around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I quickly woke up my friends and told them what happened. They looked around but didn't find anything unusual. We decided to stay awake for the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, we packed up and left the campsite as quickly as we could. We were all on edge and didn't want to stay another night there. As we drove away, we tried to rationalize what had happened, but none of us could come up with a good explanation. The experience left us shaken, and we made sure to choose more populated campsites for the rest of our trip. When I was younger, my friends and I loved exploring abandoned places. We would often go on adventures to find old, deserted buildings and see what we could discover. One day we heard about an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, and there were rumors that it was haunted. Naturally, we decided we had to check it out. We planned to go there on a Saturday night. We gathered our flashlights, cameras, and some snacks, and set off around sunset. It was a bit of a drive to get there, but we were all excited. When we finally arrived, the hospital looked even creepier than we had imagined. The building was large and looming, with broken windows and overgrown weeds all around it. We made our way inside through a side door that was slightly ajar. The interior was dark and musty, with peeling paint and scattered debris. We stuck together as we explored, moving slowly and quietly through the hallways. Every now and then we would hear strange noises, but we tried to brush them off as the wind or animals. After about an hour of exploring, we found a set of stairs leading down to the basement. It was dark and the air felt colder as we descended. When we reached the bottom, we saw a long hallway with several doors on either side. We decided to split up and check the rooms, agreeing to meet back in the hallway in 10 minutes. I took the first room on the left. It was small and empty, with just an old bed frame and some scattered papers. As I was looking around, I heard a soft humming sound. It was faint at first, but it gradually grew louder. I stepped out into the hallway, and the humming stopped. I called out to my friends, but there was no response. I started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, one of the doors at the end of the hallway slammed shut. I jumped and ran towards it, thinking maybe one of my friends was playing a prank. But when I reached the door and opened it, the room was empty. The humming started again, this time louder and more intense. I felt a cold breeze and a sense of dread washed over me. I ran back to the hallway, shouting for my friends. They came rushing out of their rooms, all looking just as scared as I felt. We decided it was time to leave. As we hurried up the stairs and back through the hospital, we kept hearing the humming and strange noises behind us. We didn't stop until we were back outside, breathing heavily and feeling a mix of fear and relief. We never went back to that hospital. The experience left us all shaken, and we decided to stick to exploring less creepy places from then on. To this day, we still talk about that night and wonder what was making those noises in the basement. As an actor struggling for steady work, I never expected a simple dishwasher repair job to turn into a fight for my life. My name is Mark, and I'm an actor. You probably haven't seen anything I've been in. Despite all the auditions I've attended, steady work has been scarce for me. My wife, Gretchen, works at a bank, and I take on part-time jobs at a coffee shop to contribute financially when I'm not pursuing acting. I also help around the house to ease Gretchen's burden as the main breadwinner. One day, Gretchen suggested I take on side gigs to supplement our income. Unsure of where to start, she advised me to check online for nearby opportunities. Skilled in construction and renovation, I searched Craigslist and quickly found a post from a man named Jonathan. He lived close by and needed help fixing his dishwasher door. Confident I could handle the task, I emailed him. After exchanging a few messages, I agreed to go to his place that afternoon. Jonathan seemed nice when I arrived. He led me to his kitchen, which was far nicer than ours, indicating he was well off. The only thing out of place was his old, broken dishwasher door. As I inspected the damage, Jonathan poured me a glass of lemonade. When I asked what caused the damage, he casually said it was old. However, I could tell he was lying. The door had scratches and yanked out screws, suggesting deliberate damage. Suspicious? I decided not to drink the lemonade. Pretending to take a sip, I kept my lips shut. I then asked Jonathan for a towel, and while he fetched it, I discreetly poured the lemonade down the sink. When he returned, I acted as though I had finished the drink. He smiled and told me to take my time before leaving the room. Although fearful, I wasn't certain Jonathan had tried to poison me. With him out of sight, I quickly fixed the dishwasher door, which took about 10 minutes. Just as I was about to leave, Jonathan appeared behind me, commenting that I looked woozy. His expectation of my reaction confirmed my suspicions. To ensure my safe exit, I pretended to feel dizzy and stumbled slightly. Jonathan suggested I sit while he got my payment and guided me toward the living room, where I noticed a rope on the table. Sensing his plan to tie me up, I insisted on immediate payment via Venmo, saying I needed to get home. Ignoring his protests, I hurried to the door and opened it, only to find Gretchen standing there. Without a word, she entered, forcing me to step back. Confused, I asked what was happening. She placed a hand on my chest before shoving me onto the couch. Turning to Jonathan, she inquired if I had drunk everything. He confirmed, amazed I was still standing. They both looked at me, and Jonathan explained that Gretchen needed a real man in her life, implying their plan to get rid of me. Gretchen pulled a knife from her purse, advancing towards me. Jonathan grabbed my arm, attempting to tie me up, but I kicked him hard, causing him to stumble into Gretchen. She accidentally stabbed him, and as Jonathan screamed in pain, I fled the house. I drove to a busy street and called the police, who instructed me to come to the station and give a statement. They warned me not to return to Jonathan's house. Within an hour, the police found evidence supporting my story at Jonathan's house, including traces of sleeping medicine in the glass and the bloody knife. However, they couldn't locate Jonathan or Gretchen. It's been 3 weeks, and I'm still waiting for the police to find them. They're still on the run. Moving to a new town for a teaching job seemed like a fresh start, until a Craigslist rental offer led me to witness something horrific. My name is Evan. Last year I got a new teaching job in Asheville, North Carolina. I had never been there before, but the job was perfect, and I couldn't say no. I instantly accepted the offer. I had to find an apartment within my price range, but I was shocked at how expensive Asheville was. The rent was more than double what I could afford. I looked all over but couldn't find anything reasonable. While I was staying in a pretty gross hotel in Nashville, someone suggested I look for places on Craigslist. I had never used Craigslist before and always thought it was a bit sketchy, but I was desperate. So I went to the rental listings and found a guy named Andy who wanted to rent out a room in his condo. I didn't like the idea of sharing a bathroom and kitchen with someone I had never met, but the address was literally down the street from my new job. I emailed him to tell him I was interested. We exchanged some messages and eventually agreed to a Zoom meeting so we could see if we were compatible. When I saw his face on my computer screen, I was instantly relieved. He seemed like such a nice, honest guy. He answered all my questions and gave me a really good first impression. During our meeting, he was sitting at his table with the kitchen counter just behind him. I couldn't see a lot of the house, but what I did see looked nice. I asked if he could move his laptop around and give me a virtual tour of the place, but he said he wanted to clean up a little first. He told me this meeting was just to figure out if we were personally compatible. That should have been a red flag for me, but I trusted him. I was about to end the call when I noticed something moving on the floor behind him. It was a little black lump. I leaned closer to my computer to get a better look, and he noticed my expression because he spun around in his chair. Instantly, he jumped up and ran into the kitchen. By then, I could see more of the black lump. It looked like someone's head covered in a garbage bag. It was some poor guy wrapped in a bag, and he wasn't dead. I couldn't see most of him because the kitchen counter was in the way, but I could still see him writhing on the floor. Andy ran toward him and kicked his head until the body was once again hidden behind the counter. He stood there for a second looking down. I think he was waiting for the body to stop moving. Then he casually walked back to his computer screen. I was so focused on what I had just seen that I completely forgot I was still on Zoom. He could still see me. He looked right into my eyes, his face weirdly blank. "So you saw that," he said. He sounded like I had just caught him jaywalking or something. I didn't move. "Yeah," I figured he said. Then he ended the Zoom call. I don't know how long I sat there completely frozen, processing what had just happened. 1 second, I was having a friendly chat with this nice, normal guy. The next, I was watching a murder. It didn't feel real. Slowly, realization set in. I was in danger, I was a witness, and Andy would come for me. I couldn't imagine what he was capable of. I had to figure out if he could track me down. Thankfully, Craigslist uses temporary email accounts to protect its clients, so Andy didn't have my email. We had never exchanged phone numbers or shared our last names, so he didn't have those either. All he had was my Zoom address. Was that enough to find me? Maybe, but it would take him a while. Even if he had all my contact information, he didn't know my hotel room. I'd be safe for now. All I had to do was call the police and tell them everything. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher everything. It took a while because I wanted to include every detail while it was fresh in my brain. I knew they would record those calls for later. Then I told her I was driving straight to the station and hung up. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I think I was still in shock, at least a little bit. That seemed to help. Then I grabbed my keys and left. When I opened the hotel door, Andy was waiting on the other side. In the time it took me to talk to the police, he had driven across the street and found me. I felt so stupid for not going to the police station immediately. He shoved me backwards and walked inside before I could stop him.